And welcome back to another episode of the Bandit Room. I'm Caleb, filling in here for Charles. We have a special, slightly different episode for you today. Today we've got our team on the podcast talking about how we help the nonprofit industry with their taxes and compliance. Nonprofits are under-recognized, not talked about enough, so we're excited to be able to talk about them for a little bit. Going forward, we're going to have more episodes like this and in a variety of formats, in addition to our regularly scheduled programming of interviews with people. So we hope you'll enjoy this special episode with our TaxBandits and Tax990 team talking about the nonprofit industry.
Hello everyone, my name is Tiffany and with me today is Christina. We are the product managers of TaxBandits and we have our audiovisual guy, Caleb, and with us is our guest speaker, Nikita. She's with Tax990, our sister product.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Thank you for joining us. We are so excited. Now, one quick note, as always, before we get started, we have years and years of experience. We love to talk about taxes, but we are not tax advisors. So if you ever have specific questions, make sure to reach out to the IRS or a certified tax preparer.
So Nikita, how about you start us out today with telling us about 990, Tax990. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, of course. So Tax990, like TaxBandits, is an authorized e-file provider. We support the suite of 990 series forms for the nonprofit tax-exempt sector and private foundations.
Awesome. Well, I would love to hear just a little bit more about the forms that you help with. So like obviously, like you said, Tax990 is also an IRS authorized e-file provider. So obviously forms are involved. I feel like a lot of people tend to be under the impression that since you're tax exempt or you're a nonprofit, there's less reporting. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it seems like a misconception, but because of that, and like you mentioned, a suite of forms. And so I'd love to hear like a little bit more about like what do they have to file and what is Tax990 helping with specifically?
Yeah, so the 990 series forms help the organizations explain to the IRS what their organization did throughout the tax year. It's basically saying, yes, we are compliant, we're following the guidelines to maintain our tax-exempt status, we're using our funds appropriately, and we're continuing to achieve the goals that were put in place when we qualified for exempt status. So while they are, there's only 5 forms that you could qualify for, they're really long forms. Like they can be up to 30 pages long based on the information that you're reporting. So like TaxBandits has a lot of smaller forms that are 1 page or 4 pages. Tax990 has forms that are significantly larger than that.
I would say so. That's a pretty long form. So as far as like there are different types of 990 forms. Mm-hmm. How would an organization know which one they need to file? I think is probably a starter question, if you will.
Yeah, it is a question we get all the time, every year, because it changes. It's based on your financial status throughout the year. So if you bring in more income, if you have more gross receipts, more revenue, more assets throughout the year, then you file a larger form. If you haven't done anything through the year, you file a smaller form. So just kind of as an overview, the 990N that's the smallest form, and it's for organizations with gross receipts less than $50,000. And then you've got the 990EZ, which is kind of an in-between of more than $50,000. And then the 990 form is the longest form. That's for organizations with gross receipts over $200,000 and assets over $500,000. So it's based on your financial activity throughout the year, what your organization accomplished. But then there's also the 990PF. So if you're a private foundation, your financial status doesn't matter. It's out the window. You file the 990PF regardless if you're a private foundation.
Is that like the 990PF? Is that one of the longer ones?
It is a longer form. Yeah, it starts at 12 pages, and then there's schedules and there's attachments.
Oh, boy. But definitely like something that's complicated for an organization to have to like dedicate time to and resources to and like track and everything.
Yeah, I don't know if we'd call it complicated because it's about your organization. Like the members completing the form know about their organization. They're just writing it down. So I don't know that it would be complicated if your organization's organized, if they have all of their ducks in a row, their financial statements prepared, their income and their assets and liabilities readily available, then it can.
So it's
be
all just
pretty
stuff they
simple.
should have.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's not so bad.
Not so
When you
bad.
think of like a super long form, if it's all stuff that you know.
Yeah, not so bad.
So I've been just listing my questions. Tiffany, did you have any questions?
I do. So obviously everyone has heard of nonprofit and charity organizations, but part of 990 is the filings apply to tax-exempt organizations too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some examples of the entities that could be tax-exempt even though they aren't necessarily a charity?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because a lot of times when you think like nonprofit, you're thinking of like a shelter or, a food donation bank, things like that. But like PTAs and schools and clubs are all considered, they're kind of in the same boat. So it doesn't have to be somebody you're donating money to or you're donating goods to qualify for these tax exempt or nonprofit status. It could be any kind of entity that is operating just on a nonprofit basis for the good of a club or a community auxiliary groups, government organizations, things like that.
That's really interesting that it could be like PTAs and like any organization could potentially. So obviously they don't, but do they just decide to be tax exempt, or like what do they have to do? Because you have to go from like forming to then being like tax exempt. So what do we know what that looks like at all?
So there is an application process with the IRS that you have to qualify for. It's not like you wake up tomorrow and you're like, I'm going to do the thing. Like you gotta follow the rules from the IRS. So you have to file a 1023 for exemption application with the IRS, and you have to get approval. The IRS will help you determine what kind of status you apply for, kind of where you fall in the categories, because there's a lot of them. Like we often know of like 501c3, but there's so many different options, and the IRS and that 1023 form will help determine what that would be, which helps determine what you file each year, what kind of responsibilities your organization has, so on and so forth.
Are there any other notable nonprofits affected by the 990 filing requirements that you haven't listed already?
Oh, the list is so long. I mean, if I were to sit here and talk about all of the different nonprofit options, we would be here for a really long time. But really, again, it can be schools, it can be hospitals, it can be churches, it can be, PTAs are part of schools, colleges, universities, any kind of educational, government entities, auxiliary groups. We've all heard of like the Lions Club and the Rotaries, things like that. Animal shelters.
Like there's an Odd Fellows group.
Yeah.
I feel like I drive past some of those, like that kind of.
Yeah, we do a lot of research at Tax990, and some of the names and the organizations we come across, you're like, what is this? Like we saw one for an organization that's main focus is something with hearses and like buttons. I'm not 100% sure of the correlation, but we shared it amongst our team, and this is interesting.
How intriguing! Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like that they do have to go through the IRS to become tax exempt, which makes sense. Like you would really assume it, but do they receive anything? Like, do they get something back, like confirmation, or like do they get anything? Because if they're tracking all of the information for the organization, like is there anything that kind of starts them out?
So when they qualify for exempt status and they get that approval from the IRS, they get what's called a determination letter. And that helps them, again, understand their tax period, their exempt status, their filing requirements, all of those things, and confirms that they are actually exempt, right? They've received this status and they can move forward as such. And then a really cool feature we actually just launched in Tax990 is the determination letter is available within your Tax990 account, which is super cool because typically an organization gets it in the mail when they get their exempt status, and then, whatever happens throughout the life of their organization, it gets lost, it gets switched hands, all of the things. Now we have it available right there in the Tax990 account for them. So when they forget their tax year or what they're filing as, it's all right there and available.
That is so cool because especially with the smaller organizations, I imagine the turnover for like treasurers or whoever's handling it has to be so high, even higher organizations, like bigger ones.
Right.
If you're not organized, your organization won't be kind of a, but that's really, really cool.
Yeah, because you figure these organizations mostly are all built on volunteers. So year after year, their treasurer volunteer could change.
Yeah.
So tracking those documents could be difficult and, unorganized. So we do what we can to help.
Awesome.
So does that determination letter also tell them what forms they need to file, or how do they find that out?
It will give them the general idea of what forms they need to file. So like I said, the 990, the 990N, and the 990EZ all have to do with their financial status. So if they're required to file one of those forms, it'll say on the determination letter you need to file one of these 3 forms. If they're a private foundation, it'll clearly say you're a private foundation, you have to file the 990PF form.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. That definitely helps get somebody like pointed in the right direction for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned when we were talking about the forms earlier, you mentioned schedules.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so the schedules accompany the 990EZ, the 990, and the 990PF forms. And they're basically just additional documents to provide very specific information based on how you've completed the 990 series forms. For example, if you list that you had fundraisers and gaming activities, the IRS wants to know more about that. So Schedule G, which is for gaming, will then be required so that you can thoroughly explain what you did in the gaming and those activities. But there's, I want to say 18 different schedules. So it's all based on the information provided on the form.
Okay, so you don't have to do all of them. It's more based off of like
Right.
what you did equals what you have to report.
Correct.
That's
yes.
pretty cool though.
Yeah. And another big one, like Schedule A, is for 501c3 organizations to explain why they received that 501c3 status, what they did with it in greater detail. So that one is probably the most common one, or Schedule B, which is for contributions, which again, most organizations operate off contributions, so they have to report that a lot.
That definitely makes sense.
Within Tax 990, with those schedules, is it automatically selected based on the information they input, or do they have to like go in like a
Yep, so
vending
similar
machine?
to Tax Bandits, like you guys have the 941 and the Schedule B and R and all of those things, and they automatically generate based on how the information's completed. Tax 990 works the same way. If they indicate on the 990 form they're a 501c3, automatically Schedule A is going to be added and they'll be prompted to complete it. Or same with all of the schedules, it's going to automatically generate.
I mean, that's definitely more convenient though than like having a stack of schedules that you're
Right.
reading through and trying to figure out like which ones do I have to pick.
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost like a vending machine. I need this one.
Yeah,
I need this
and the
one.
nice thing is it also only populates the necessary parts of the schedule. So some of the schedules are 5 or 6 pages long, but the organization may only need to complete page 1 and 2. So Tax 990 will help determine all of that information so they're not completing unnecessary work.
Okay, so it's very intuitive to what they need.
Right, yes.
Okay, so Nikita, what would you say is the most common type of 990 that's filed?
I think the 990N is probably the most common one that's filed with us, that or the EZ. The 990N is a super short form. It's like 3 super simple steps, and you transmit it to the IRS. What's really cool is all of that is saved in your account, so you have records of it year over year. I know this wasn't the question you asked, but we also have super cool features that you know when it's accepted, you know if it's rejected, you can retransmit if it's rejected. So there's a lot of really cool features associated with filing that, or with all of our forms, that kind of help through that process and tracking your records year after year. So the 990N, just for record keeping purposes, is a really popular form. The 990EZ is also very popular because it kind of speaks to our clientele, because it's in that financial range that a lot of treasurers are still doing it. A lot of just individual organization members and volunteers are assisting in those. But I mean, the whole suite of forms is pretty popular because the 990PF, there's not anywhere else to e-file that form. And I mean, as we know, it's mandated now. So the 990PF is very popular. I guess I don't know which one specifically is the most popular.
Or like maybe all of them are
They're all
popular. I feel like
popular.
that's what we're
Tax
getting.
990 is popular, okay?
Well, I mean, it sounds like even for the shorter form though, it's
Yeah.
more intuitive. It's simple. It's record keeping. It's having error checks. It's like having an easy way to complete,
Yeah.
the form. So, I mean, I'm pretty excited about it.
So,
But on that same note of like there are different ones, and they're all like popular in their own way, and they're shorter, longer, required. How long like does it take treasurers to complete these? So like if somebody contacts Tax 990 and they're trying to figure out like what timeline do I need to dedicate to this during my year, really, like what do we know what that looks like for them?
Like I mentioned earlier, it's really based on how well they keep their financial records in order. We have built-in audit checks so we can help guide them through it and make sure they're meeting IRS instructions, make sure that all of their calculations are correct. We can help with a lot of those things. If they don't have their financial details in order, their organization member details in order, it's going to take a little bit longer. But we have clients that come in on the deadline day and complete the 990 form, in 30 pages in one day. But we also have clients that start 2 weeks early and still get it done on time. But it's really based on how much your organization keeps their records organized and how much time you put into it.
So if you're organized, like it is intuitive enough that you could do it pretty quickly. It's just like how much time, like, are you a preparer or you are like get it done at the last minute kind of person, but you could do either, it sounds like.
If you have all your things in order, you probably could get it knocked out in an hour.
Oh my gosh. So that's not so bad. That doesn't sound nearly as intimidating as like
bad.
a 10, 20, 30 page document. Like that's definitely
But again,
helpful.
it's very intuitive to help you navigate what you need, what you don't need, what you need to correct. Like it really walks you through it.
Well, you mentioned the deadline. People come in and they knock it out. What is the deadlines associated?
So that's a tricky question because there is a deadline every single month.
Oh boy.
Yes. So it's strictly based on the organization's tax period, right? So the IRS determines their tax period based on when they submit their application, get all of their documents in order, so on and so forth. The most common tax period is a fiscal tax year or a calendar tax year. Calendar tax year being January through December. And then the fiscal tax year that's more common is a July through June tax year. So while we have a deadline every single month based on fiscal years, our most common ones are November and May. May 15th is the biggest deadline for calendar tax years because the deadline is the 15th day of the 5th month following the end of the organization's tax year, which is a mouthful, but it's not that bad. And we have a deadline calculator on our website, so that's helpful too.
Oh, that is handy.
So you don't have to like on your hands count like, okay,
Right.
my 5th month from my year
Right.
end.
But right now we're focusing on the May 15th deadline. So for organizations that had a fiscal year ending in June, it would be 5 months later is November, the 15th day of November. So that's a really big one that we're focusing on right now.
Now, on that like focus that the November 15th deadline is coming, if you were one of those organizations that maybe is not quite so organized and it's going to take you a little bit, I mean, but it happens like because they are volunteers for the most part, especially around that end or the easy really, or some of the private foundations. Like if it's going to take you a minute to figure out where all this stuff is, like what can they do if they're not going to meet that deadline?
So they are tax forms, right? We all put that off until the last minute because nobody enjoys doing that. There is what's called the 8868 extension form. So if you file the extension form on or before your original deadline, it's basically an application for a 6-month extension. So if you have a November 15th deadline coming up and you're just not going to be able to make it in time, file the 8868. It's just a few short steps. It takes 5 minutes, and you get 6 more months to file. So then your deadline's May, which is a long time from now.
And it's an automatic extension. It's not one that you have to jump through the hoops for.
Nope, it's an automatic extension if you file on time. You cannot file late. It will be rejected. You won't get an extension.
So what would be the deadline for that extension?
So it's the same as your original 990 deadline. So if your original deadline's November 15th, you have until November 15th to file the extension.
Now, can they also do the extension through Tax990?
Yes, you can. And we have bundle options. So you can
Not bundle options.
I know. You can do
Everybody
the
loves a bundle.
extension
I do
now
love a bundle.
and prepay for the 990 form. So then in May, when your 990s due, you just do it and send it, and you don't have to make another payment.
I mean, that's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Discounts, bundles, great.
And like, what a way to get you started.
I
'Cause sometimes
know.
just having like the momentum of starting the thing
Yep.
is helpful. So
And
that's
then we
pretty
send you
exciting.
reminders too, so you won't forget to file in May.
And if they're in the middle of it and they're like, oh, I can't find this, I don't know where to get it, they can go ahead and file the extension. That gives them the time to find it, get their stuff together, and go ahead and get it done.
Now, if that does happen, like if they're in the middle of it, I know on TaxBandits, a lot of our forms, they allow you to kind of like save and continue where you left off at a later time. Does that automatically happen with
Yep,
Tax990
automatically
too?
saves as you go.
Okay, I mean that's super helpful with
I mean,
a-
it has to with 30 pages long.
Exactly. Yes. So very cool. So I just from the Tax Bandit side. So I know we have like the 94X forms, and I think they even go through like a similar e-file system to what the 990 forms go through. And I know sometimes the 94X forms have like a payment that gets submitted with them. Obviously, the 990s are focused more on like nonprofit, tax exempt. Is there ever like a scenario where they have to submit a payment with any of those forms?
Only with the 990 PF, they may have fees due for taxes and fees. We walk you through that. If that happens, you're going to know when you're filling it out within the application. You'll be notified and given options on how to pay those fees due. But the 990 PF, in regards to the suite of 990 forms, is the only one that requires or may require payments due. The 990 T is one we haven't talked about yet, but we also offer with Tax 990. And it can be filed in addition to the 990 form for organizations that are reporting unrelated business income, which is probably a topic for another day. But if you're filing the 990T, you may also have some fees due.
So if they have fees due, does the 8868 also extend the time that they can like pay that amount, or how does that work?
It does not. So you would still have to make your payments prior or on time, and then file the forms within your 6-month extension period.
Okay, but I mean, it's still saving you some time to like get all of your donor information together, or like all of that stuff that you have to report on those 990s. Awesome. I know another question that we get on Tax Bandits that I'm curious to see how that translates to the 990 forms is for like 1099s, for example. If you report wrong amounts or you file for the wrong person or like whatever it may be, there's an option to file a correction or to like void a form. Is there something like that with the 990 forms?
There's not the option to void a form, but there is what we call an amendment option, which is essentially the same as your correction. So once the form is accepted, if you notice an error, you can file an amended return.
Okay, and that's just kind of like correcting the...
Yep.
Gotcha. Awesome.
What information can be corrected on the amendment?
Anything on the amendment can be corrected with the exception of the EIN for the organization. That can't be corrected because the IRS accepted it with the provided EIN. But anything else can be corrected. Now, we also have rejections. So I know we haven't really touched on those yet, but you file an amendment to an accepted return, or your originally transmitted return is rejected, so you can edit and retransmit that as well.
Do you have any examples of like common things that could be rejected that like people could watch out for or try to like fix before they go to file to avoid those rejections?
I mean, really, it's just making sure that the information you provide matches your determination letter. The tax year is a really big one we see. If an organization provides the incorrect tax year, it's going to get rejected. If they put in a DBA name or doing business as name with their EIN, it could get rejected because the IRS wants their legal name, not their DBA name. So making sure your EIN and organization name match, making sure your tax year is correct, making sure you choose the appropriate exempt status like 501c3 or 501c4 or whatever that may be. But all of that, again, can be found on your determination letter.
And you would think that like they could go ahead and add the organization from that determination letter in Tax 990 and then just have it correct for whenever they need to go file.
Yeah.
And they could probably I know we have clients on Tax Bandits that'll do this, but I would imagine they could fill in information kind of as they have it through the year and then be able to file when it's time so that it's not quite so much all at one time for all those pages.
Yes, we have a lot of clients that start their form after their deadline ends and just slowly work on it throughout their 5-month time frame and add things as they go. So that way when it's time to transmit, everything's done and ready to go.
It seems like a nice process to go through.
And so while they're doing all that, what information do they need for most of the forms?
Again, they'll need their financial information, their assets, their liabilities, their revenue, their expenses. They're going to need their very specific organization details from their determination letter. If they've had volunteers or they've paid any volunteers, contract employees, things like that, they'll need all of that information.
That is a lot of really good information that you've shared with us today. Is there anything else that you want to divulge to us?
Like Tax Bandits, we do have a very dedicated support team. We have phone, chat, and email support available, and we are happy to help. We know that this is a lengthy process to go through, and I know that we've talked about so many features and tools to help make it a little bit smoother and streamlined. But if you have questions, if anything comes up, anybody needs help getting started, we're happy to take your call and help provide all the guidance that we can throughout that process. So give us a call.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nikita, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for
And
having me.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to have you back because I know we talked about some other forms and stuff. But for anyone using Tax Bandits that is part of a nonprofit or tax exempt or helps out with one, or if you're just filing like you mentioned, some of the private foundations or other organizations might have regular business forms they have to file. So if you are part of an organization or tax exempt entity that has to handle 990 series forms, make sure to go check out Tax990, contact their support team with questions. And I think that wraps us up for today.
Yes, it does. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And if you haven't already, go make your Tax Bandits account at TaxBandits.com. Or if you're exempt, go to Tax990.com and start your account today. And you can always leave any questions or comments in the comments. Thank you. Bye.
The Bandit Room is a production of Tax Bandits, located in sunny Rock Hill, South Carolina. We've been the industry leader in e-file solutions for businesses of all sizes since 2017. Go to TaxBandits.com to learn more. The views and opinions expressed in the Bandit Room are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect or state the opinions of Tax Bandits or its parent company, Span Enterprises. No information should be considered as tax, legal, financial, or other professional advice.